from Atlanta, Georgia, this.
Claressa Shields has already conquered 5 weight classes, become undisputed more than once, and built a resume that most fighters could only dream about.
Heavyweight and super middleweight, and I've been champion.
And yet, tonight in Atlanta, the greatest challenge may not be another championship. It may be the weight.
Shields in complete control, but gutsy effort being shown by Scott.
On August 15th, Shields returns to 160 pounds.
This is more body shots than we're accustomed to seeing from Claressa.
To challenge Australia's Kaye Scott for the WBA and WBC middleweight titles at State Farm Arena.
First man, as Daniel Perkins talked about,
The unusual part is what Shields is leaving behind to make it happen. The heavyweight division,
Well, she's ready to go! Claressa Shields!
where she currently reigns as undisputed champion. So why would an undefeated champion who has already made history deliberately move back down 3 weight classes?
The 5-weight world champion.
And perhaps even more importantly, what happens if Kaye Scott turns this historic comeback into the biggest upset of her career? Because Scott isn't walking into Atlanta simply to survive.
She comes to the ring representing the Glamour team.
She's walking in believing she can take Shields' titles, her momentum, and maybe even rewrite the story of women's boxing. At first glance, this looks like another chapter in the Claressa Shields legacy. But look closer, and the matchup becomes much more complicated. Shields is the bigger name.
In the world, she says is the quote. Katie Taylor might have an argument against that.
The more decorated champion and the undefeated fighter. Scott is the reigning WBA and WBC middleweight champion, and that creates a fascinating situation. Shields is the challenger,
put in and exchanges has to be someone who's more versatile.
but she's the one carrying the enormous expectations. The question isn't simply whether Shields is talented enough to beat Scott. Of course she is.
Live on pay-per-view, the best female fighter in the world.
The question is whether the version of Shields that dominated at heavyweight can safely and effectively return to the division where she once ruled everything.
Non-stop punches by Shields!
Because at 160 pounds, this isn't about reputation. It's about timing, conditioning, strength, speed, and whether the weight cut changes the fighter we've known for years. And Kaye Scott has been waiting for exactly this opportunity. Claressa Shields has spent most of her career making history look normal. The American superstar is undefeated as a professional
Women's middleweight championships
and has collected major world championships across multiple divisions. She has also become undisputed in 3 weight classes, while her recent career took her all the way into heavyweight territory. But her journey back to middleweight is what makes this fight so unusual.
Shields is one of the biggest names in women's boxing.
Shields last fought at 160 pounds in 2023.
6 months, it happened a lot to where I kind of had got...
when she defeated Maricela Cornejo by unanimous decision. Since then, she moved upward, eventually becoming the undisputed heavyweight champion. Now she's reversing course, not just moving down one division, not just testing herself at super middleweight. She's returning to the 160-pound middleweight division.
I'm a killer. It is what it is.
And immediately challenging the champion. That tells you something about Shields' mentality. When most fighters reach the top, they protect the position.
Gabriel's too, all of a sudden.
Way down.
Way down.
Shields has repeatedly done the opposite. She looks for another mountain, and this mountain belongs to Kaye Scott. Scott's story is completely different. The Australian champion isn't carrying
Left hand and another left hand.
Shields' Olympic resume or worldwide fame. But she has something Shields doesn't have entering this fight. The middleweight championship belts are already hers.
Prize Curry by starting so fast in the last.
The WBA lists Scott as a 42-year-old Australian middleweight champion with a professional record of 4-1-1
As number 1 in Australia, for me to go over to...
and no knockout victories. Her recent rise accelerated after a pair of fights with Olivia Curry. Their first meeting ended in a majority draw.
Curry with impunity.
Then came the rematch, and Scott emerged with the WBA and WBC middleweight championships. That sequence matters because Scott hasn't simply been handed a title opportunity.
Back to where
She fought her way into the position, and now she gets the biggest fight of her professional career.
But that's a decent amount for time.
Right?
Then came the rematch, and Scott emerged with the WBA and WBC middleweight championships. That sequence matters because Scott hasn't simply been handed a title opportunity. She fought her way into the position, and now she gets the biggest fight of her professional career. This is where the matchup becomes fascinating. On one side, you have Shields, the elite technician. Her greatest weapons have never depended purely on raw power. It's the combination, the footwork, the jab, the ability to control distance, the ability to read an opponent and adjust over the course of a fight. And most importantly, the experience of fighting at the highest level. But Scott brings a different challenge. She's naturally bigger than Shields at middleweight, listed at 5'10" with a 70-inch reach, compared with Shields at roughly 5'9" with a 68-inch reach according to the WBA profiles. Those numbers aren't enormous differences, but at 160 pounds, small advantages can become important, especially when you're fighting someone who already owns the division. Scott doesn't need to convince herself that she belongs at middleweight. She already does. Shields has to prove that she can come back and immediately dominate it again, and that distinction could define the entire night. There is another layer to this fight, the pressure.
To these arenas to come see.
When you're Claressa Shields, winning isn't always enough. The expectation is dominance. If Shields wins a close decision, some fans may immediately ask whether the weight affected her.
No, going down to 160, I do that.
If she struggles early, the questions become even louder. And if she loses, then the conversation changes completely.
And I'm putting on a great performance for y'all tomorrow because Kaye Scott.
A defeat wouldn't erase her career, not even close. But it would create the first major question mark around a fighter who has spent years making her resume look almost untouchable. That's why calling this a legacy fight doesn't mean one loss destroys everything. It means the result could change how the next chapter is written, and Scott understands the opportunity. The WBC has described this as one of the biggest opportunities of Scott's career, while also emphasizing the significance of Shields returning to middleweight. Think about what is waiting for Scott if she wins. She wouldn't simply defeat an undefeated former undisputed champion. She would defeat Claressa Shields in the exact division where Shields once established herself as the standard. And she would do it while defending the championship she worked so hard to obtain. That's the kind of victory that can transform a fighter overnight. Before the fight, Scott is the champion people are talking about. After a victory over Shields, she could become the name everyone has to talk about. And then there is the setting, Atlanta, State Farm Arena, more than 16,000 seats. And according to the World Boxing Council, Shields will become the first woman to headline a professional boxing card at the venue. That gives the fight another historical layer. This isn't simply a title fight. It's a major statement for women's boxing. Shields is returning to a division she previously ruled. Scott is defending championships against one of the most accomplished fighters the sport has produced. And both fighters have something deeply personal at stake. For Shields, it's another chance to prove that her greatness isn't tied to one weight class. For Scott, it's the opportunity to prove that she isn't simply the champion who happened to be standing in front of a superstar.
Have to be underneath, and
she's the champion who can beat the superstar. And that is why the first few rounds could be critical. If Shields can establish her rhythm early,
good shot. There's that left hook. Finally landed.
Use her speed and control the distance, the fight could begin to look familiar. But if Scott can make her physically uncomfortable,
what to watch early on,
use her reach, force exchanges, and prevent Shields from settling into her preferred rhythm, suddenly the pressure shifts. Because every minute that Scott remains competitive creates another question. Did Shields really come back down at the right time?
Is evolving, and people are just realizing, like, yo, literally.
There is also the question of durability. Scott has never been known primarily as a knockout artist. The WBA lists 0 professional knockouts on her record, but that doesn't mean she needs one punch to win this fight. She needs rounds. She needs discipline. She needs to make Shields work, and she needs to turn the fight into something uncomfortable, because the longer this becomes a tactical, physical middleweight contest, the more interesting the equation becomes.
But now we work on turning all the punches over, and I've also too just worked so much.
Elite resume, Scott has the natural familiarity with the division, and somewhere between those two advantages is where this fight will be decided. The fight is scheduled for August 15th at State Farm Arena in Atlanta and will be broadcast on DAZN. If Shields wins, the implications are enormous. She would have returned to middleweight and immediately captured the WBA and WBC championships, putting herself back at the center of the 160-pound division. From there, the conversation could shift toward whether she wants to pursue another undisputed run at middleweight, or whether she eventually moves back toward the heavier divisions. And there's another possibility. A dominant Shields performance could remind the entire boxing world why she's been regarded as one of the sport's defining fighters. But if Scott wins, everything changes. Scott could become one of the biggest breakout stories in women's boxing. The Australian would have beaten one of the sport's most accomplished champions while defending her own world titles. And suddenly, every major name in the division would have to look in her direction. That's the kind of victory that creates a new era. But perhaps the most interesting outcome is a competitive fight, because even if Shields wins, a difficult night could tell us something important. It could show that moving from heavyweight back to middleweight isn't simply a matter of making the scale. It's about becoming that fighter again. The fighter who moves differently. The fighter who trains differently. The fighter who absorbs pressure differently. And that's something no championship belt can guarantee. Claressa Shields has already done enough to secure her place in boxing history. That isn't really the question. The question is whether she can keep adding to that legacy without taking a step backward. And Kaye Scott has been given the perfect opportunity to make sure she doesn't. On one side is an undefeated legend returning to the division she once controlled. On the other is a champion who has spent years fighting for the recognition that comes with a moment like this. For Shields, this is about proving that greatness can travel across weight classes. For Scott, it's about proving that greatness can be taken from someone else, and that's what makes this fight so dangerous for Claressa Shields. She isn't defending a reputation that can be protected by history. She's putting that reputation back inside the ring, against a champion who has absolutely nothing to lose, because if Claressa Shields wins, another chapter is added to one of boxing's greatest careers. But if Kaye Scott pulls off the shock, the story won't be about the legend who came back. It will be about the champion who stopped her. And by the end of this night in Atlanta, boxing will know exactly which story it's telling.